There was so much tension in the air. A hush fell over the courtroom as Sean Diddy Combs, the once untouchable hip-hop mogul, sat facing the jury. Gone was the swagger, the bravado that had defined his public persona for decades. In their place, a flicker of fear, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. This was no longer a stage for his carefully constructed image. This was a court of law, and the stakes were higher than ever. Diddy, the self-proclaimed king of hip-hop, stood accused of heinous crimes, including coercion and racketeering. His empire, built on music and charisma, teetered on the brink of collapse. May 12, 2025, marked the beginning of what promised to be a sensational trial, one that could shatter Diddy's carefully curated image and expose the dark underbelly of fame and fortune. The courtroom was packed with journalists, eager to capture every moment of the proceedings. The public's fascination with the case was palpable, as everyone wanted to know the truth behind the headlines. The prosecution, led by the formidable U.S. attorney, laid out the charges with chilling clarity. They presented a case that was meticulously built over years of investigation, involving countless interviews and a mountain of evidence. The prosecutor's voice echoed through the courtroom as they detailed the allegations. Diddy, they alleged, was not just a successful businessman, but the ringleader of a criminal enterprise, a mastermind who orchestrated a series of heinous acts under the guise of his entertainment empire. The defense team, composed of some of the most high-profile attorneys in the country, listened intently, preparing for their turn to counter the accusations. A mogul who used his power and wealth to take advantage and control women for years. The stories of the victims were heart-wrenching, painting a picture of a man who was far removed from the public persona he had cultivated. Each testimony added another layer to the disturbing narrative. The indictment painted a grim picture. It was a document that left no room for doubt about the severity of the charges. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was clear. Diddy was facing a battle for his freedom and his reputation. It detailed a pattern of manipulation and intimidation, a systematic approach to vulnerable individuals. The headline screamed of betrayal and deceit, capturing the public's imagination and fueling endless speculation. Of young women lured into Diddy's inner circle with promises of stardom and success, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare. The allure of fame had turned into a prison, with Diddy as the warden. The stories of these women were a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk behind the glittering facade of the entertainment industry, only to be trapped in a web of lies and control. The accusations were shocking, the details graphic and disturbing. The courtroom was often filled with gasps and murmurs as each new piece of evidence was presented. The emotional toll on the victims was evident, their faces etched with pain and sorrow. The details graphic and disturbing. The media coverage was relentless, with every new revelation making headlines. The public was captivated, unable to look away from the unfolding drama. The case had become a spectacle, a tragic story that highlighted the dark side of celebrity culture. The man who had once been synonymous with success and excess was now portrayed as a predator, his legacy forever tarnished. The trial was not just about determining guilt or innocence. It was about uncovering the truth and seeking justice for those who had suffered. As the proceedings continued, the world watched, waiting to see how the story of Diddy would ultimately unfold. Central to the prosecution's case were the allegations of freakoff parties, debaucherous gatherings fueled by drugs and alcohol, where Diddy allegedly orchestrated and participated in sexual acts with young women, many of whom, the prosecution argued, were intimidated or too intoxicated to consent. These parties, the prosecution claimed, were not isolated incidents, but part of a systematic pattern that spanned years. The prosecution alleged that Diddy used his wealth and influence to silence his victims, employing a combination of threats, intimidation, and hush money to keep them quiet. They painted a picture of a man who believed himself above the law, who saw women as objects to be used and discarded at will. The prosecution's case, a pattern of abuse. At the heart of the prosecution's case was the testimony of two women, identified only as Jane and Nia, whose identities were protected due to the nature of the allegations. These women bravely stepped forward to share their harrowing experiences, despite the immense personal and emotional toll it took on them. Their stories were not just accounts of individual suffering, but painted a broader picture of a pattern of abuse that had been allegedly perpetuated by Diddy over the years. Jane, a former aspiring singer, delivered a tearful and harrowing account of her alleged ordeal. She recounted in vivid detail the emotional and psychological manipulation she endured. Her voice trembled as she described the initial excitement of meeting a music mogul who promised to help her achieve her dreams, only for those dreams to turn into a nightmare. She described how she had been introduced to Diddy through a mutual friend, how he had promised to help launch her music career. The initial meetings were professional and filled with hope. Jane spoke of the excitement she felt, believing she was on the brink of a breakthrough in her career. However, this hope was short-lived as the nature of their interactions began to change. She spoke of the insidious shift from mentorship to manipulation, the subtle pressure that escalated into intimidation, and, ultimately, S.A. Jane detailed how the boundaries of their professional relationship were blurred, and how she felt increasingly trapped and powerless. The promises of career advancement were replaced with threats and intimidation, leaving her feeling isolated and vulnerable. Nia, a former employee of Diddy's company, alleged that she had been subjected to unwanted advances and verbal attacks. Her testimony echoed Jane's in many ways, highlighting a disturbing pattern of behavior. Nia described how the workplace, which should have been a safe and professional environment, became a place of fear and anxiety. She described a toxic work environment where Diddy's behavior was an open secret, where speaking out was not an option for fear of losing your job or facing his wrath. Nia's account painted a picture of a company culture that enabled and protected Diddy's actions, where employees were complicit, either through fear or loyalty. The testimonies of Jane and Nia were powerful and gut-wrenching, shedding light on the dark underbelly of the music industry and the abuse of power that can occur within it. Whispers become screams. Testimonies from the shadows. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former long-term girlfriend. Ventura, a successful singer and actress in her own right, described a tumultuous and abusive relationship that left her emotionally scarred. She recounted an incident in 2016 where Diddy allegedly physically assaulted her in a jealous rage, an incident corroborated by hotel security footage. Ventura's testimony was powerful and heartbreaking. She spoke of a man she had loved and trusted, a man who had ultimately betrayed her. Her courage in coming forward, in breaking her silence, sent shockwaves through the courtroom and beyond. The defense's rebuttal. A story of consenting adults? Diddy's defense team, a group of high-powered and expensive lawyers, mounted a vigorous defense. These attorneys, known for their prowess in high-stakes cases, were determined to dismantle the prosecution's narrative piece by piece. They meticulously examined every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every angle of the case to find inconsistencies and weaknesses. They argued that the prosecution's case was built on the foundation of shaky accusations, fueled by opportunism and a thirst for revenge. The defense suggested that the accusers had ulterior motives, perhaps financial gain or personal vendettas, and that their testimonies were unreliable. They highlighted discrepancies in the accusers' stories, pointing out how their accounts had changed over time. They portrayed Diddy as a flawed individual, a man prone to infidelity and bad judgment, but not a criminal. The defense acknowledged his imperfections, admitting that he had made mistakes in his personal life. However, they emphasized that these mistakes did not equate to criminal behavior. They painted a picture of a man who, despite his flaws, had never crossed the line into illegal activities. They argued that the relationships in question were consensual, that the women involved were adults who made their own choices. The defense team brought forward evidence and testimonies to support this claim, showing that the women had willingly participated in the relationships and events in question. They argued that these women were not coerced or manipulated, but rather, they had made their own decisions as consenting adults. They painted a picture of a man who loved women, who enjoyed their company, but who never crossed the line into coercion or abuse. The defense team emphasized Diddy's respect for the women in his life, arguing that he valued their autonomy and never forced them into anything against their will. They presented character witnesses who testified to his respectful and consensual relationships. They argued that the Freakoff Parties were simply gatherings of consenting adults, that the prosecution was sensationalizing their client's lifestyle to fit their narrative. The defense team described these parties as private events where adults engaged in consensual activities. They argued that the prosecution was attempting to twist these events into something sinister, using them to unfairly tarnish Diddy's reputation and build a case that was more about shock value than truth. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button.